Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Sorensen, co-founder and director of Optimize, a student-led social innovation community at the University of Michigan that provides support, mentorship, and funding for students to turn ideas into impact. And this is the Why Not Me podcast, where I speak with entrepreneurs, activists, researchers, and leaders from all walks of life about how they're using their life to make a positive impact in the world. Today I spoke with Pam Smith, the president and CEO of the United Way of Washtenaw County. Pam's been a friend of Optimize for a long time and was one of the first people to provide funding when we were first getting started. We talk in this episode about what the United Way's work actually looks like in Washtenaw County, especially now post-COVID. We talk about what the work of a CEO and president of the United Way looks like and how Pam worked through her career to end up in a leadership role in nonprofits and philanthropy. And we talk about how students can do positive work in the community in a responsible and effective way. I really enjoyed the conversation, always enjoy catching up with my old friend, and I hope that you do as well. Thanks so much for listening. Pam, it's good to be with you. Thanks so much for making the time.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm thrilled to be able to be with you and to talk about Optimize and everywhere we've come from since then.
Yeah, absolutely. You were our first external funder ever.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how happy I am that we did that for you. When I first met you, a local friend introduced us and said, "You've got to meet this guy. He's going to do great things." And so I can remember when you came in, and you were telling me about everything that you had wanted to accomplish. And I was like, "Oh, where have you been? We've been waiting for you." Like, United Way is here for people just like you to help us create community solutions and change people's lives in our community. And so I just felt like that was one of my best days ever when I got to meet you, and in the relationship we've had now for like 9 years. I can't believe
9.
it.
Yeah. 9 for both of us in our roles.
I know, right? Of
That
course,
was huge.
neither one of us looks any younger or older.
No, we look the same.
We look the
Everything's the same,
same.
but much wiser.
That's true.
That was a hugely encouraging moment for me. I had never, I was so nervous to come talk with you because I had never, done that before and asked
Yeah.
someone for support and that was real wind in our sails. And after you decided to commit some funds to what we were doing, that really opened the door where the university also did. And so that's very
Yeah.
cool.
The one of the kind of trademarks almost of United Way for so many agencies is the initial funding that we give, to startups and to great ideas and to great partners in the community, is that they're able to use our dollars and use our name to leverage, not only leverage additional dollars, but leverage all different kinds of resources. And sometimes resources include intellectual property, it includes networking, it includes opening a door. So it's not always money, but a lot of times, just making sure you're working to make those connections, and build your own network is really what makes a difference.
Yeah. So on that note, I know a decent bit about what United Way of Washtenaw County does. But for, I think a lot of our listeners are students who are interested in social impact and interested in, nonprofits and interested in philanthropy, but might not have a sense of what that landscape looks like. So I don't know. I guess I'm curious just to ask you from your perspective, what is the work of being the president, CEO of United Way of Washtenaw County, and how has that changed since COVID hit? Because I know that was a very different moment for everyone, and United Way was really involved in trying to figure out how to, I don't plug some of the holes that really grew much bigger during that time. But maybe before COVID, like what was the work like, so that some of the students can understand that a bit better, and then how has it changed, and what's it like now? I know in our world, um, we're not back to pre-COVID normal, and we never are going to be, and we're still figuring out what the differences will be long term. But Yeah, maybe just sort of track through kind of what that work looks like from your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, let's break it down into a couple of different parts, just so we don't lose anyone, and also help me answer all the questions you piled into one. So, United Way has been in our community for over 100 years. And the very first United Way kind of sounds like almost like a bad joke from a bad comic. But back in like 1870, a woman, a priest, a rabbi, right, and a local minister got together in a bar in Denver, maybe not a bar, maybe it was a saloon back then, and talked about helping everyone in their community that was in need, right? And so that was the very beginning of United Way. Our United Way has been in Washtenaw County for 100 years. And I think it really speaks. The reason that we're still around is because it's volunteer led, volunteer driven. We are a small staff in the grand scheme of things compared to other United Way, or compared, well, not only to other United Ways, but compared to nonprofit agencies in Washtenaw County, we'd be considered small. And that's because we only have about 12 FTEs, actual employees, but we have hundreds of volunteers that really make the difference. And so, for the students that maybe need to learn a little bit more about United Way, um, we provide a safety net of support. So we're trying to raise the funds that we need in this community to create an impact so that everyone in this community can thrive. So every person, we all do better when we all are doing better, literally. Um, and so we do that through a variety of ways. Um, we are fundraisers, so we are constantly trying to raise funds. We're grant writers. We leverage additional dollars through corporate sponsorships and corporate, like Social Responsibility Act dollars. We have leveraged government dollars in the past. So there's a lot of different ways we try to leverage what we're doing to create a bigger voice and a bigger seat at the table for everyone. So we're not in this to do it alone. We're in this to do it with everybody in our community. So that's United Way in a nutshell. If you really do want to know more about the history, go to uwgive.org and click on history, and then you can learn more about the work that we do um, in Washtenaw County. And then you asked me about pre-COVID and post-COVID. So I call it BC, like before COVID.
Yeah, an AD after Delta.
Yes, exactly. Funny how history repeats itself, and also scary. Um, and so I think it's easiest to talk about what we learned from COVID. So um, when COVID first hit, so we always fund health, education, and financial stability. So we know our dollars are finite. So you're never going to see United Way fund an environmental or arts and culture. Those are extremely important for the health of a local um, a local municipality. But we know that our dollars are finite. So we invest in health, education, and financial stability work. And so we were pretty darn good at that, right? We had processes in place, we had best practices, we had a number of different procedures to make sure that dollars were coming in and going out to over 60 different programs. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, the needs of our community were drastically different. Kids didn't need in person tutors. Students needed to make sure that they had the internet. They needed to make sure they had a working computer, laptop, or tablet. They needed to make sure that they had somewhere in their home that was quiet enough to participate in online school. Um, People that used to go to the doctors couldn't go to the doctors, for transportation reasons. We lost almost half of our buses. They just closed them up. Like, we're not riding, we're not doing the bus routes to Ypsilanti. So frontline workers that typically live in 48197 and 48198 all of a sudden lost transportation to get to where they were
Mm.
needed to go to work, because how many of us were so fortunate to be able to work from home, right?
Right.
Well, frontline workers, healthcare workers, childcare workers, they don't get to work from home. And then they lost their transportation to even get to their job. So we knew that we had to change everything that we were doing. There was going to be no more 2 or 3 year grant cycles. There was no more, you know, planning as far as looking at 2 or 3 years out to how things were needed, because we had an immediate need. And what we learned is that United Way is very good at raising money. We're very good at distributing money, and we're very good at understanding what the community needs are. So we raised about $1 million right off the bat in about 4 weeks, and we distributed it in about 4 weeks. And so that was extraordinary for us. We used to have 6 month grant cycles. We used to do long due diligence on everything related to a nonprofit that we were going to give money to. We read their board minutes, we looked at their 990s, all kinds of stuff. And when COVID hit, we also noticed a disproportionate a number of people were affected by COVID. And it was our BIPOC communities in the hardest hit marginalized areas of 48197 and 48198. And so we said, first of all, we need to raise money quick. We need to get the money into the hands of the people that needed it the most. And we needed to change how we did things. And so, what we were able to do is connect with local communities, with church groups, with neighborhood associations, and we were able to get PPE into the hands of people that needed it the most. We were able to fund transportation alternatives so people could get to work that were still working or needed to get to work. We were able to completely change some of the ways that we were putting money into education, because we were going to make sure that kids had all of those things that we needed, that they needed, internet. You know, we had a large part of the county that was didn't have, internet. They're still
Yeah.
using dial up. Yeah, how does a kid do his homework if he's supposed to watch two videos, right? And he can't get the videos,
Yep.
or a thousand other things. So not only were we able to raise those dollars and get them distributed, but they really went to neighborhoods that needed it the most. So we were changing how we did things. We became much quicker, much more flexible. We developed new processes. And I think all of those things are really important for students to also think about, right? The old way isn't necessarily the best way. And as long as you're open, listening, flexible, and transparent, the community is going to help you and tell you what they need and how to deliver it. It's no more of this hierarchy where we know what's best. We're going to tell you what to do with your money. We're going to put all kinds of restrictions on your money that we give you. And then we're going to require you to do a whole bunch of extra reports to validate why you got the money in the first place. And so a lot of things changed for us. And I think for the better.
So do you think that that's a change that will continue moving forward? Sounds like, you're talking about the old way as a way that might have been overly sort of cumbersome for community organizations. What what have you learned from that process of speeding it up and of I guess loosening maybe the restrictions on funds?
Yeah. So um, we became a much more responsive organization. We became an organization that had a lot more trust in the community, because we were putting trust into the community. And how those things might change. We wanted to make sure that dollars were going to BIPOC led organizations. We wanted to make sure that people that were leading local agencies, programs, or initiatives lived in the communities that they were, where their programs or initiatives took place. Um, they knew what they needed. They knew what they needed, not us, And so many times, we learned so much from just listening, from making sure that you're curious, right? One of the best things I love about Optimize and the students that are engaged with Optimize is that they're curious by nature and they are not afraid to ask questions. And I think sometimes the leaders and the best tagline
Mm.
is is problematic. And the reason I think it's problematic is because when a student comes in as a freshman, they get to say, I go to U of M, I'm the leaders and the best. And really, becoming a leader is a lifelong journey. And you
Yeah.
are never going to be the best because there is always, especially in a community where we're the most educated community in the country, right? That's a tag that Ann Arbor gets. It's your responsibility to make sure that you never stop learning. Lifelong learning is a real thing. And that's some of the things that I just love about the optimized students is they're curious, they're not afraid to ask questions. And when COVID started, I was like that pesky 4-year-old. I kept going, well, why do we do that? Why is that holding us back? Why aren't we meeting that need? And I think it's really important for people to understand. I think Robert Frost said, education is the ability to listen to almost anything without losing your temper or your self confidence.
Mm.
And so, if you think about that, so much of the time, people won't ask questions because they don't want to appear ignorant, or
Right.
people don't want to, or they get mad, right? We've seen that in society so much in the last 2 years. It's like,
Yep.
I think this. And then the person in response doesn't say, oh, tell me more. That's really interesting. They go, wow, that's wrong.
Right. Yeah. Or labeling of what kind of person you must be to have. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so when COVID happened, I made sure that all of that, all of those defenses, right? All of the uncertainty, all of the what ifs did not stop our forward progress. They were considered in our reaction to keep going and have that forward progress that we needed. And consequently, because of our equity work and the equity focus that we distributed those dollars with, 78% of those dollars went to the most marginalized communities. The other part went to rural communities that were highly isolated and suffering.
Yeah.
Manchester, let's just talk about Manchester. So, for those of your listeners that don't know, Manchester is a rural farming community, probably no more than 18 miles from the University of Michigan. But in the last 2 years, they lost their transportation. They don't have a bus line, they don't have any kind of Ubers, anything like that. They lost their only pharmacy, they lost their grocery store. So all of a sudden, you have seniors that can't get medicine, you have families that can't get fresh produce, you have all kinds of and that's also a community that didn't have broadband,
Mm.
right? So how isolating, they can't even get all of those different things. And we went out and we just talked to people, like, what do you need? How can we help you? And through those conversations and um, um, through the Manchester Resource Center, working, with us and so many other partners. So the most important thing to remember about United Way is we never do it alone, right? So there are over 60 programs that we fund, and many of the actual agencies might be here local in the Ann Arbor Ipsy area, but they still work with families, in
Yep.
Manchester or in other places. Um, so just really listening to what people needed and then making sure we delivered on what they needed was critical. And because we did it with such an equity focus, we were able to leverage our largest state grant that we ever received. We were able to get a $500,000 grant from the Racial Diversity Task Force, recognizing the work that we were doing, with the different programs and initiatives in our community was really making a difference. So that's the beauty of collaboration and community impact.
So, do you think that this is a trend in philanthropy more broadly, that some of these things are starting to be understood? I know, like with the Mackenzie Scott gifts that have been happening, in the last couple of years, that's a radically different approach to philanthropy than what we've typically seen.
Yeah.
And it seems to embrace some of these same principles. But on the other hand, there are cultural traditions around philanthropy that seem to run counter to this whole idea as well. Um, without asking you to speak to any specifics of the that you work in that might be sensitive. What are your sort of perceptions on that broadly in terms of how philanthropy as a idea in this country or in this area? And I want to ask you later a little bit about this area specifically because I think it's a really interesting example.
Yeah.
But yeah, how do you see that? Do you think that this is something that's happening more broadly?
I think that philanthropy is evolving and I think it's going to continue to change. Um, so if you compare, right? So if you compare, especially through a lot of our different equity work that we've done, is so much of this country was born on the backs of people of color, specifically Black people of color. And so many processes, structures, and procedures were in place to make sure they weren't able to own land, to make sure they weren't able to accumulate wealth, to always be under the management of someone else instead of having the true freedom that they really deserved. And so in the past, we almost have kind of like a savior mentality, right? People are poor. I'm going to give you bread for today, right? Instead of the old adage of teaching people to fish and giving them resources so they can become independent. And I think what we're moving to today is understanding. So there is a kind of philanthropy called community-centric fundraising, and it changes from catering to the donor to catering to the community and always putting people first. And I think United Way has done that very well for a long time. But we are really doubling down. We have a strategic plan that we're currently building through 2025, and we're really taking a harder look at community centric fundraising. And it's a new concept in philanthropy. So I do think change is going to happen.
Does that present any challenges with the donor relationship end? Because, a big part of traditional fundraising is, starting with donor intent and kind of working with what they want to do. Um,
Exactly.
but I guess this evolution of thinking needs to happen with the donors as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that we have been doing for about the last 4 years, we began holding equity challenges, 21-day equity challenges. I think you've heard about them. I think you and I have
Yes. Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
talked about them. So
Yeah.
for those students and your listeners that don't know what that is, it was originally started. Two Harvard professors worked with Food Solutions Network on the East Coast around the Boston area, and it was a way for people to be able to engage and learn more about all things regarding equity. And gosh darn it, if I don't appreciate them for making it all open source, because
Oh
they were
yeah.
like, I came across it and I took it. And 21-day equity challenge is free, anonymous, private. And each day for 21 days, you get a topic in your inbox, in your email. And in that topic, there's all different kinds of ways for you to continue learning. Um, and it talks about all different kinds of things. It talks about different levels of racism. It talks about becoming an ally. It talks about segregation. Um, it talks about the LGBTQ plus community. It talks about AAPI communities, BIPOC communities, um, and and things like privilege and white fragility and implicit bias. And so the reason when I came across it, I thought it was so important to bring here is because I'd been talking about poverty in our community for years. And we had commissioned the ALICE report, which is asset limited, income constrained, but employed, essentially the working poor.
Hmm.
And I had so much pushback in Washtenaw County that there wasn't poverty here and that Ann Arbor was the best place in the world to look. Just look, we're on all of these lists, right?
Right.
So much so, Jeff, that I bought billboards on 23 and 94 that just said poverty here question mark yes.
I remember those. Yeah.
Yeah, right. just because, and so what I found is that people, we might begin the conversation, but if we used terminology or words or conversations where people didn't know what they were, then they just shut down and they stopped talking about it. So the equity challenge for me gave people a way to do it in the comfort of their own, you know, desk, coffee shop, wherever they opened up their laptop for that day. And then they could watch a video, they could read a white paper, they could have a call to action through an advocacy thing, they could go to a community event. But we just started peppering them with all the different ways they could learn, and they could choose, you know, like, oh, I can only spend 5 minutes on it today, but I'm walking away knowing more about what white fragility is. And the next time I hear it, at a restaurant or at my work or at book club or at the PTO, I'm going to at least know that definition and be more comfortable learning more about it. So that's really what we were just trying to do, is get people like an on-ramp to the expressway, right?
Hmm.
To get on and to be committed to talking about it and recognizing its existence. And so the first one that we did went viral. Um, it went across the country. I had people calling from California and Texas and saying, hey, you know, I know a lot of, like, what we did is we took the basic framework from Food Solutions Network, and um, we completely localized it for here. So all of the data was about us in Washtenaw County. And I was like, sure, take whatever you want, because a lot of it was general enough, right? I can't change the definition of implicit bias, or I can't, you know, like,
Right.
I'm not going to change a TED talk or anything like that. But I could give people data about the poverty rates here. I could give people data about the social determinants of health here, you know, like, and people could do that in their own. So long story short, because I know we don't have forever, I do get
No, go ahead. I don't mind. I like the details.
So we made sure it was open source. We returned all of the learning to our network. And I'm just really proud to say that over 65 United Ways have done equity challenges, not only across the nation, but in 2 countries abroad. And we've had over 300,000 people participate in an equity challenge.
Wow.
And that to me is just it's kind of just like what students do at Optimize, is they have a good idea and they build on that good idea until it becomes actionable. It changes a community somewhere. A community can be 2 people, but it's changing a community, and then it takes off, right, and gets bigger. And that's what was so exciting to me when you first talked to me about what your ideas were and how to capitalize on putting theory into practice, and what
Hmm.
you were learning in the classroom you needed to be able to put into practice into a community. And it really, that's when the real learning takes place. That's really
Yeah.
when the really, like, we talk a lot about in the nonprofit world, in education specifically, that children are learning to read until 3rd grade, and then they begun reading to learn, right? So
Mm.
there's a definite change. And that's what happens with optimized students. You know, they're in the classrooms, they're learning about the theory of social justice and social change, but optimize gives them the ability to put theory into practice and make things happen. And when you begin to see the cause and effect of action, that's so powerful. Um, so,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I like, just to stick with the equity challenge for a second,
mm,
I like
mhm,
that it's something that people, like you said, can do in their own space, in their own time, and not feel like they're being put under a tremendous amount of pressure to be at a certain place at a certain time. Um, I think a lot of these issues that are part of the equity challenge have become very controversial, in our society.
mhm.
Partly though, because the way that they've been presented sometimes is through like corporate seminars where you're there and your boss is there, and there's, this
Yeah,
hugely pressurized environment to
yeah,
feel like I really can't learn because I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing and being, sort of like suffering consequences of that.
Yeah.
And I think that that is a hard environment to learn in. And, this environment where you're in your own space and it's giving you an on ramp, like you said, to understanding concepts that are not easy to understand sometimes, depending on your perspective, and might challenge your current thinking. That kind of an environment, in my view, is a more conducive environment to learning than some of the kinds of contexts that have become very controversial. And I
Mhm.
think that they've become controversial not necessarily because of the subject matter alone, but because of the way it's been presented in certain cases. Um,
Yeah. I mean, being a middle-aged white woman, I have had questions about why are you doing this, right?
hmm,
And I think it's a great question. And I am always the first to admit I am not an expert, right? And I am a continual learner and I rely on all of the great information that's out there. I just want to be a conduit, right? I'm in a position where I can share information, and that's what I'm trying to do. Um, and I think that that's what's so important to remember is that every single person has or can have that opportunity to be a conduit for conversation. If you hear somebody say something, and you want to know more about it, ask them, well, why do you feel that way? Or do you know X? Do you know that? And I have stepped in it so many times in the 4 years that we've been doing this. I've, I have, and I loved it when an author came out and said being anti-racist is a commitment to fight it every time you see it, and that includes you in yourself, right? And so that's so important. You don't have to be perfect, and being perfect is an excuse for not trying. And that's true in so much, right? In so much of life. And so I just want to be seen as an ally. I want to be seen as someone not trying to wield power, but share power, so to speak. And make all people accountable for dismantling kind of the racist structures that we have in place that keep things, keep so many people from really thriving in our community, which is what our mission is.
right. So you have a unique vantage point on this too, I think, being in the position that you're in, where, like you said, a lot of the nonprofit organizations that United Way is serving as a conduit for funding in different
Hmm.
ways and coordinating funding even from other places as well,
Yep.
um, are based in zip codes in Washtenaw County that a lot of people who think about Washtenaw County have never even been to or heard of, right? Because Washtenaw County is so strongly associated with Ann Arbor, which is so strongly associated with the University of Michigan.
Mhm.
And it's, I think, many students, certainly, but I think even a lot of faculty um, never get outside Ann Arbor when they're in Washtenaw County. It's like you're there and then you're on the highway to the airport or something, and it's
Yep.
kind of it. Um, and I think a lot of the because of the divide in wealth and the inequality in the county, a lot of the donor base comes from Ann Arbor, I would guess, in terms of where donations come from. And how do you think that say students specifically, but really
Yeah.
anyone, what is a way to sort of come into the University of Michigan or into Ann Arbor in a way that is respectful of the realities of the county, and how to sort of go about expanding the perspective of what it means to live in this county and what the position in Ann Arbor is relative to elsewhere. I guess just what would be sort of some of your, I don't know if I want to say recommendations, but how do you
Okay.
see the opportunities for students to broaden their perspectives in a way that is helpful and not harmful, I guess?
Yeah. That Thanks for asking that. So in Washtenaw County, US 23 is kind of an economic divide, right? So a lot of times when we're talking in the community, whether we're at a company or at a function or wherever we might be presenting, which is we try to be everywhere, we say if you are a child born in at St. Joe's Hospital, whether your parents turn right or left out of the driveway greatly determines the quality and the opportunity in your life. Um, Children in 48197 and 98 or BIPOC infants are 4 times more likely to die than a white infant in Washtenaw County. That's horrendous, given that we are a wealthy community overall. Um, or the average, let's say the average income is higher than a lot of other places in the state of Michigan. Um, your life expectancy, if you live in Chelsea or you live in Ipsy, is very different. Your race determines sometimes. If you are a Hispanic male, you have a 17-year less life expectancy than a white male in our community. So it's very real. The divide is very real. And I think it's important to think about that. So students come in from all over the country, all over the state as well. And the best way to get to know the community that you're living is in the easiest way is to volunteer.
Mm.
Um, and there's a Student United Way on campus. And so if you're interested in learning more about connecting with the broader community, you can contact the Student United Way on campus. Or if you're already in a great group, like I'm sure there's probably 2,000 groups, right, on campus,
So
2,000 student groups at least.
probably about, yeah, something like that.
Well, your student group can go to volunteerwashtenaw.org. Um, there's over 200 opportunities. Even during COVID, we used to be higher than that, but we still have about 200 opportunities listed through about 100 different agencies. So you can look at everything and say, I'm really into early childhood. Where can I work with students? I can only work on Saturdays. I only can volunteer on Saturdays. Tell me those. We have so many different filters that you can find something to connect with. And we've included arts and environment on the volunteerwashtenaw.org site so that we try to meet everybody's sweet spot. And the reason we do that is because we want people to volunteer. This organization was built on volunteers. Nonprofits in general are built on volunteers. We have volunteer boards, we have volunteer committees, finance, HR, communications committees. And we don't care where you volunteer. We want you to be connected. So it doesn't have to be United Way. It can be any organization because they all need help. And I think it's really good for students to seek out information if they're interested in something. What I find with not only not students singularly, but with general population is in England, they have a phrase and it's mind the gap. And it literally tells you to not fall in the 1 foot space between the platform and the subway car, right?
Hmm.
And they mind the gap is everywhere. And I loved that analogy when I first heard about it because I've taken it to heart and I try to mind the gap. Because so many times throughout life, if we don't have the information, we're in the gap, we fill it with assumptions and with
Mm.
our own experiences. And we fail to find out the whole story or the other side of the story. So we just pour everything we know into that gap. And therefore, we have the answer and we're smart and we can move on. When really, we don't have the answer at all.
Right.
Like we have literally fallen into the gap and we have filled the gap with ignorance, myself included, which is why I'm always constantly stopping, to ask why. So that's what I'm asking students to do. I remember we met, I think it was the first or second cohort where students were proposing um, different activities or projects to us, and we were giving feedback at your request, to
Yep.
what they thought they were doing. And I can remember one student, very well meaning, young female, blonde, was going to go. She said, I'm going to go live in a homeless camp for the
Yeah, I
week
was just thinking of that. Yeah.
so I can learn more about the homeless. And I was like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Like, for, no, you're not, for so many reasons, like for her own personal safety, for the people that are living in that camp. They don't want outsiders to come in and look at them like sightseeing, right, in a homeless camp. But her intent was good, Jeff.
Sure.
It was not filled with malice. It was not making fun of anyone.
No.
Um,
Yeah.
she just needed to realize there's a lot of different ways to find out. You can volunteer in an agency and learn firsthand all about what the problems are, and so
That's
go ahead.
that. I was just going to say that's been a lesson that we've carried forward into all of the mentoring that we do now with student projects. Is right from our first workshop talking about, who are the people that you're trying to serve with whatever it is you're doing, right? And some of you are trying to build a, sustainable clothing company and you're selling to people basically like you, and fine. You understand your customer pretty well in that case, and you can probably just start selling the stuff and start getting the feedback.
Yeah.
There's not a huge risk of harm there. But if you're working with a community whose life experience is very different from your own, and there are risks that you don't understand because you don't know the variables and you don't really understand the context, it's oftentimes better to work with an existing organization that is working with that community so that you
Exactly.
can understand, or that population, so that you can better understand how to do it responsibly and effectively.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, certainly any students who want to work on issues of homelessness, we always say there are agencies and organizations locally that would really value you spending your time volunteering, and you can learn
Yes.
a lot from that.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
Absolutely. So we want students to be involved. We want students to be curious. We can certainly use the manpower in the nonprofit world. Um, and we're happy to help guide, and I am so happy to hear you say, that you ask them to come in ready to learn as opposed to ready to lead.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So,
for
and there's
sure.
certainly room to develop those leadership skills. Like any nonprofit will give you the opportunity to develop leadership skills. Um, but come in interested in learning more about what they're actually dealing with on a daily basis.
Well, you yourself have been in nonprofits for a long time and have developed a lot of leadership through those opportunities, right? How did
Oh, yeah.
you didn't go straight into nonprofits though out of college, right?
No, I didn't. Um, I had a lot of really interesting, great jobs. Some only lasted a day. And I was like, "Ooh, that one is not for me." So some were funny. I mean, I've always been a potter, a ceramicist. So, and I thought, oh, that's such a great, I can make art wherever I go, right? There's clay everywhere. And I moved out to Colorado and I got hired right away by a studio. And the first day I went in and they were like, you need to throw 100 mugs today. And I was like, oh, no, I was really thinking more like I might do some vases or some platters or, and they're like, no, no, no. You need to have 100 bucks before you finish today. And I was like, this job is not for me. I was not going to be a production potter. So that was like a very short job that I had. But in Colorado, I really fell in love with early childhood education, and my degree is in education. And so I spent 15 years, almost 15 years in early childhood education in Colorado. And then we had the opportunity to move to Michigan. It was closer to our family. We wanted our young children at the time to know their aunts and uncles and all of their cousins. And so we moved here. And that's when I'm my nonprofit, and that's when I crossed the bridge into nonprofit land. I started at the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum, and I was the director of public affairs and marketing. They were just opening up a preschool gallery, so it was great for me to be able to help, open the preschool gallery, stock the store, buy the merchandise for the store, do all the publicity, do the marketing. And that's where I really got connected. If any students that are listening, the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum was voted best date night. So You should go. There's lots to learn in the hands-on museum, and if your date's boring, you're going to have a lot of fun with the exhibits. So there you go. Um, but it was at the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum where I really learned a lot about the community. Um, there were so many companies that were invested in the Hands-On Museum. The Hands-On Museum was way ahead of STEM and STEAM. They were making science interesting for everyone, young to old. Um, but there was a great group of donors. There was a great group of philanthropists. There was a great group of leaders. And I was able to meet all of those people. So earlier in the podcast, we talked about how important it is for students to be building their network, kind of like what you did when you came to U
Right.
of M. And so I would encourage people, the people that are listening, to always think about how can you build your network. Um, and that's what the Hands-On Museum did for me. It really built a network for me. It really made me feel like part of the community. You know, I was from Colorado. I didn't know boo.
Yeah.
um, and so I was really able to learn a lot there. And so I spent 9 years at the Hands-On Museum. And then I was still really always interested in early childhood education. And I was lucky and fortunate enough to be asked to lead Child Care Network. And Child Care Network is a local nonprofit that works in 7 counties. Actually, it's bigger than just Washtenaw County, and it helps families find childcare and pays for scholarships. So, again, another nonprofit that was way ahead of its time in saying people need help. People want to work and they need help paying for childcare. So, childcare
Yeah.
scholarships, increasing the quality of care by doing adult learning. So, we did over 10,000 hours of training for childcare providers, just to help teach best practices and in early childhood. And then we helped parents find childcare. So those were the 3 things. And it was so funny when I went there, what I learned, I really learned a lot by working in 7 different counties, because what I learned is in some counties you needed to have a cup of coffee and a good story. And in other counties, you needed to have an academic, data driven presentation, and you better be on point, right, with all
Yeah.
of your data sources. And so it really opened my eyes up to how different Michigan is, right? Like uh, where Ann Arbor is not necessarily where other counties are, literally and figuratively,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Um, and like I said, as a life, doing this lifelong learning, I really learned how to work in different environments, right? And getting the message across of why childcare was important. It wasn't babysitting. You only have one chance with a developing brain, and it's so important to provide a rich, stimulating environment. And so had a lot of passion for that job, had a wonderful board there, just amazing. And then I was there about 4 years, and this position came open. And I thought at the time, well, this would give me a broader reach with um, different focus areas, but concentrated just on Washtenaw County. And I thought that sounded pretty exciting. Because why? Because I didn't know a whole lot about some of those focus areas. And I thought, I'm going to broaden my horizons and I'm going to go into this job learning, and that's exactly what I did. I just thought, time to learn.
A
So,
little bit less time on the road too, maybe.
yeah, exactly.
7 counties is a substantial amount of time on the road, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was actually. But the quality of care in each of those locations was vastly different. So, it was really good concentrated work, and the work still goes on today. Child Care Network is doing such a great job for the kids in those communities they serve.
So, for a lot of students listening, a lot of the students that I work, I would imagine that the idea of leading up a United Way for a county would be kind of a dream job. And you mentioned that when you were at the Hands-On Museum, this was your first nonprofit experience, and you were building a network with different donors and supporters and community members and everything. Um, do you think that was Like, what did you draw on when you were interviewing for your United Way job in terms of like, here's some of the experiences that I have that set me up to be able to do this work?
Hmm. I think as a leader of a nonprofit, it's all about the soft skills, right? It's about communication. It's about um, network. It's about how you build trust and transparency. It's about time management. It's about problem solving. It's about being curious and creative. It's all of those things. And you learn all of those things along the way. Like a lot of my friends that I've talked to go back all the way to their very first job, about I remember at my first job, I learned X, right? And so, like, I happened to be a waitress, like when I was 16, 17. And actually, through college, it paid my way through college because, and I learned so much. I learned how to read people. I learned how to make a connection with people. I learned how to make eye contact.
Yeah.
you know, Sometimes at 6 in the morning, it's a little hard to make eye contact with people. You
I
learn
was
how
I
to
was a waiter as well, and I credit a lot of the same kinds of lessons from that.
You're a
Yeah.
multitasker, right? You can
Right.
multitask because you have to get, dressing for table 12, 3 drinks for table 11, and you got to cash out table 9. I mean, I bet you're a good multitasker. So
And you have
it's
to learn
no
how to apologize after you spill the wine on someone. Or was that just me?
exactly. Nope, nope. We might have done it a little differently. We might have done it on purpose. No, I'm just kidding. um, and so when I came to United Way, I was able to talk about caring for community, right, through my other jobs. When I was in Colorado, I had 2,500 families, 250 employees through different childcare centers. So you can talk about how you build community, how you communicate. And then what I learned at the Hands On Museum and what I learned at Childcare Network, I brought to this position as well. So I had cemented a good foundation and a good network through my work at the Hands On Museum. Um, I learned about different counties at Childcare Network so that I was able to bring, that was such an important piece where I talked to you earlier about learning what to do in each county to connect.
Hmm.
I had to do that here at United Way for all of the different organizations that I have to connect with, right?
Sure.
I had to learn how to communicate and on what level and how to create an understanding of how we're all interconnected and we're all linked. Because I think in a university, in a community, you can tend to work in silos
Oh
because it's
yeah.
easier, it's faster, right? It's
Yep.
all of those things. If you can just do it by yourself, and collaboration takes time and it takes finesse and it takes great communication, but it makes a much stronger product, right? Your silo, which is a tall cylinder, right?
Yeah.
When you form a collaboration, all of a sudden you've got great basements and great depth, right? On a building that's much deeper and it's going to be able to go much taller than a silo and be a lot less risky. So another analogy. I'm kind of a visual learner, or I like to create pictures in my head. I don't know if I'm doing it for you guys, but
Well, I had to look up because I heard that term silo a lot when I started working at the university,
Mhm.
which, yeah, just for people who don't know, it's like an old grain silo. 'Cause I had to look this up. It's like
Yeah,
a tall thing with walls, and you're not communicating basically with other things. It's just a
right.
bunch of little tall things lifted up in the same space, but never interacting with each other. They're holding their own stuff inside.
Yeah.
Um, and the university is definitely that way, and it's hard to communicate across that, much less create collaboration.
Hmm. I know at the school, I mean, at the university, we shared our equity challenge across the university. And I appreciate the university for being so open and so supportive of United Way. Um, they hold a workplace campaign for us. They provide so many resources, intellectual property, the expertise and the willingness to volunteer. It's amazing, the relationship we have with the university, and I really appreciate it. And when we started to talk about the equity challenge with them, I met with the president of, or the vice president of DEI, and learned that there was more than 100 DEI coordinators. So for all the different
Yeah,
programs and all the different schools, and once again, I was like, hooray! Like, thank you for making that a priority, right? And thank you for bringing so many voices to the table, because it makes for a much richer conversation.
for sure. For sure. So, as we sort of are, moving toward wrapping up, yeah, just wanted to ask you, in your role as not only the leader of a nonprofit, but a nonprofit that works with other nonprofits and is assessing kind of their work. And I know you said you've sped that process up, but it's still important to have a sense of what makes for a successful initiative, something that might be worthy of grant funding, and
Hmm.
supportable. Um,
Yeah.
for students who are working on projects, what do you think are some of the traits of nonprofit efforts that have been really successful with the resources that they've, stewarded?
I think they have been innovative, they've been creative, they've been problem solvers, they look to the community for answers. Let me just give you an example. So, Ypsilanti Meals on Wheels. So, for students that don't know, Meals on Wheels, every day, homebound seniors get a meal delivered to them by a volunteer. Um, and it's a great program. It gives people a social connection. Um, and every single time something came up, they figured out a way to solve it. And so, like when COVID happened, right? They doubled up on meals so that they made sure that people had meals. When they found out that people were giving their pets some of their food, they started a pet delivery service,
Hmm.
food delivery. So they added pet food to the delivery so that people could take care of their pets. When they found out about personal care items that people couldn't get out because of COVID, they started delivering personal care items. So adult needs, um, soap, toilet paper, personal protection stuff. And so they just kept solving for X all the time, right? So
Hmm.
whatever came up, the Y did that. So the Y, most people know the Y as a place to go work out. Well, they had to close their building. Well, the
Right.
Y is also very successful in early childhood and taking care of young children and having childcare centers. They developed a collaborative in the Ypsilanti area so that there was a sliding scale place for people. They went to Glacier Hills, which is a senior living center, and opened up childcare for frontline workers. So they just were constantly not only listening but acting on what they were hearing, um, in a time where some nonprofits didn't survive because they were like, oh no, we're not going to be open. But it's like, well, but the people, this is when they need you the most.
Right.
So all of those kinds of things, being proactive, being curious, being creative, being problem solvers, critical thinking skills, um, and in always thinking, I guess what's really important for the students especially is to ask who's not at the table.
Hmm.
So even if you have a great group of people, who's not at the table and whose voice needs to be heard, right? Everyone has a voice, but we need to make sure that we're always listening, and we need to make sure that we're inviting that voice into the conversation.
Yeah, I think that I was going to ask you as a follow up, what do you see as a really common pitfall for, efforts that are seeking support and maybe get it or not, but then really it doesn't work out. And for us, at least with Optimize, one of the big things that we've tried to focus on is understanding that a stakeholder is anyone who's affected by the work that you want to do, and
Yeah,
whether or not you factor them in is up to you, but they're still a stakeholder.
yeah.
And so really trying to improve people's understanding of that and that exact question you just asked of who
And
really does need to be at the table.
And I think at an elementary level, I think if you're trying to solve a problem, really know what the problem is and don't assume what the problem is. And so many times with grants, as we're reviewing grants, if the question is what color is the sky, don't answer the grass is green. Like, Like, there's a big disconnect there, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, for people trying to get funding, find the link, find the commonality between who you are, what problem you're trying to solve, and who you're asking for the resources. And then
Mm.
figure out what that link is. It could be personal, it could be, oh, this person had a mom that was affected by dementia, therefore they care about dementia, even though they're the CEO of X company that has nothing to do with Alzheimer's or dementia. If they have a personal experience with it, that's what there's the bridge that you build. If the company is a drug discovery company that's working on dementia and Alzheimer's, there's the bridge that you build. So you have to find the connection. It would be really interesting if at one of the optimized workshops, you gave people everyday objects and told them to find the connection
Hmm.
to, like,
That's an interesting idea.
yeah, just to see if they could make some kind. What is the connection? What is
Yeah.
the connection to that? That would be a really interesting experiment. You should try that.
Well, we'll leave it at that. I think that that's a great
Okay.
suggestion to end it on. I know you've got to get going, but I mean, I
Mhm.
think that I think that that in itself is one of the main skills of nonprofit work and philanthropy and community work is just always trying to figure out what are the connections here between the things that are happening.
We
Um, yeah,
we are all connected. We all need to be invested in taking care of each other and taking care of the earth. So
absolutely. Well, Pam, you've been such a huge part of our history here as we're entering our 10th anniversary as our first funder. And then with some of the work that I was involved in during right at the very beginning of the pandemic as well with mutual aid. The
yeah,
United Way really helped make that happen. So, thank you for all you do in our community. And I think that hearing some of what you've shared today will be really helpful for students who are interested in this kind of work. And always grateful to have you in our community as well with Optimize. So thank you for making the time today.
absolutely. And thanks to you and your listeners for living united. And feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk to a student.